Hi guys, my name is Vila and I've been interviewing my dad about his 1997 Everest Nova climb. He was there with an expedition filming a documentary. He was with climbers like David Brashears, Ed Viesturs, Guy Cotter, and a few other notable guys. Even though this was 30 years later, I have quite a few questions for him because there's a lot of questions that are just like unanswered on the internet, so I wanted to ask him and share those with you guys. So I created this series, My Dad Climbed Everest and I Have Questions. I originally made this series for TikTok, hence the reason it's formatted the way it is, but basically these YouTube videos are compilations of those videos. But if you want to check out my TikTok to see them in their original form, I encourage you to do so. In today's video, we're covering the following topics. So we start by talking about Sherpas and what they do to help and how it's kind of controversial. A lot of people judge climbers for having Sherpas help them, but he gives his opinion on that. Then we talk about if climbers actually carry their own loads. And he tells us about the gear he used in the 1990s and how that compares to now in the 2020s. And then how weather forecasting has changed on Everest and how that has made a huge impact on climbs. His key pieces of equipment while he was on Everest, and the difference between the north and the south side of Everest, and why most climbers climb the south side of Everest, which is the Nepal side. So I hope you enjoy.
Great questions on Sherpas and if they're exploited. The answer to that, they are exploited and they're not exploited. Depends on time frame. I think in the early days, a lot of them were exploited. A lot of the deaths on Everest are Sherpas. And it's the most dangerous job in the world to be a climbing Sherpa because these guys carry our loads. They go through the ice fall multiple times, more times than I would. They're in dangerous situations under seracs, walking over crevasses more than I am. You can say they're exploited in that way, but if you go to Nepal, there's been an evolution in Sherpas, and a lot of these Sherpas are now leading expeditions or lead guides. They make pretty decent money from a standpoint of living in Nepal. So a lot of these guys nowadays run their own businesses. They have their own tea houses. Some of them own helicopter companies that take people from Lukla to base camp or all over the Himalayas in Nepal. A lot of them have their own guide services now too. And so there's been an evolution in that. A lot of these guys also work for the Western guide services and they lead, they're lead Sherpas. They make pretty decent money. The other problem is the high fatality rate of climbing Sherpas. The Nepalese government, I believe, back in 2015 when there was a big, or 2014 when there was a big accident in the icefall, promised these guys they'd start a insurance fund for these Sherpas, and I don't think the Nepalese government ever followed through on that, which is a problem, but I'm not 100% sure. I would say a lot of Sherpas guide on Everest when they're young, knowing that it's not they don't want to do it when they're older, and they also understand, I think, the dangers of these climbs, but they're taking these big risks to make money. The reason is I think there's just not a lot of well-paying jobs in Nepal if you compare it to a high altitude climbing Sherpa. So bottom line is you could argue either way on that. What role did the Sherpas play on our 97 expedition and our my 91 expedition? We couldn't have climbed that mountain without the Sherpa crew. These guys are great. They're the type of guys you want in a foxhole next to you when it gets really bad. But I can tell you from my experience, I would have never been able to climb Everest, and I probably would have never survived Everest without the Sherpa crew and the team like Ed Viesturs and Guy Cotter and Pete Athens and David Brashears in '97. But the Sherpas carried a lot of our gear. They help us carry the camera gear up, the medical gear, the oxygen, the food, the tents. They help set up camps. Those guys are wonderful, and they deserve credit for really everything, especially nowadays. They deserve credit to get all these people up and back down. Our climb in '97 and '91, especially '97, we always had Sherpas with us on the summit, going up to the summit with us on summit day. There were some guys that stayed down at Camp 4 to help us when we came back down. They cooked boiled water. They made sure the tents were secure. They cooked our meals. They did everything. They really helped us out. They were our guardian angels up there, and they worked as a team, and we could trust them. Once again, just a great group of guys. I think people carry their own gear and stuff up that mountain. I think it might have changed. I mean, the Sherpas still do the brunt of the work. Don't let anybody tell you differently. And they carried most of our gear up, our camp gear, and our food and oxygen bottles. And we in '97 carried our personal gear and some snack food and things like that, our personal first aid kits. And I assume it's the same still now. You need to carry your load up there. It helps with acclimation, it helps build strength, also wear you down if you get too high up with too big of a load. I'm assuming it's the same. I hope it is. Gear has really changed and is continually evolving. My gear in '91 was, North Face, top and bottom, kind of heavy. I guess it was Gore-Tex, but it leaked a lot. It was heavy though, and kind of cumbersome. And we had down suits, which are the same thing you have today, and down sleeping bags, and North Face dome tents and things which you have today. But all that's kind of got lighter with new materials that are being used. But the big difference, I think, between the years, in equipment, is the oxygen setups. I've noticed they've gotten lighter and a lot more efficient than they were in '91. So I think that really has made a pretty decent difference in weight and efficiency of gear since I climbed. But I look at the gear that I had in '91 compared to what they had in the 1970s and 60s. And the '91 gear was so much better than the early days when those guys were climbing. So I got to keep everything in perspective. It's just like everything in life. Everything changes and evolves. And gear does the same. The stoves are completely different than they were when we were climbing. Back in the '90s, we had these things called 111B stoves. They're huge, made out of steel. They put a lot of heat out, but they were bulky, and you had to kind of baby them all the time. And now you have those MSR stoves that are real lightweight, real efficient. You don't need a lot of fuel for them. And so things like that have changed. The biggest change is the weather forecasting models that they have. Technology has changed dramatically, since the early days of climbing, obviously, but since I was there in '91 to '97, now you can get up-to-date instant weather, especially concerning wind patterns and temperatures, and you can make a decision based on the new weather satellites and data on when to go for the summit, especially based on minutes. Compared to what we had in '91, we had good weather data forecasting, but it was more broad. And they'd say, hey, like the next 3 or 4 days are going to be decent. This is what they think the weather is going to be. But now it's really pinpoint accuracy, and it's made a big difference. And that's one reason why you see all these crowds on Everest on summit day. Everybody's getting the same weather reports, and they're so accurate. People know when to go exactly, and what time is going to be the best time to be above 8,000 meters. And so everybody kind of goes at the same time now. And back in the day when I was up there, we didn't have all that. The key pieces of equipment for me on Everest were my plastic boots that I was wearing. They fit me perfectly. I also had over boots, and I had these great Patagonia heavy-duty gloves. I had a great down suit that was rated about minus 20 degrees. I never got cold on Everest, and I believe it's because I had good gear, and I layered. I had a lot of layers on, but I also stayed hydrated, and I was eating as much as I possibly could. So I was fueling the fire, so to speak. I had a really nice headlamp. and we had a great oxygen system. And so kind of all that combined, the gear-wise, it really helped me get to the top and get back down without frostbite or anything. We didn't have any sponsors, I don't think. I think Ed Viesters did. I can't remember who the sponsors were. And Veka Guffinson and Guy Cotter had sponsors. And I can't remember who they were. Tashi Tenzing, one of the Sherpas, that was on our crew, the grandson of Tenzing Norgay, he was sponsored by Thai Airways at the time, and that was kind of cool. And also he was sponsored by some hotel in Thailand, at the Bangkok airport called the Amari Inn. And when we were flying out of the Bangkok airport, our team had a nice dinner there, compliments of the Amari Inn. It was nice. The route on the north side and south side, they differ a little bit. The summit day on the north side is a lot longer and it's a lot rockier, and the slope, the rocks are downward on the north side, so it's easier to slip on summit day. On the south side, you're on snow most of the time and crampons all the time, and so there's a lot more snow on that route, and you climb the southeast ridge up to the summit on the south side. On the north side, you climb the north ridge up to the summit, and you can see I looked at the north route when I was on the summit. I remember looking down, and you can see the trail coming up from the north side to the summit when I was there in '97. But it's different, and the thing about the north side, they don't have that big ice fall, the Khumbu ice fall, like we do on the south side, where you get a lot of avalanches and things. And I do think there's less avalanche danger on the north side compared to the south side. So why do people climb the Nepal side on most climbs? It's because it's easy to get into Nepal. You can get a visa very easily. You can get a visa at the airport. It's easier to go through Nepal on the south side than it is going through China on the Tibetan side. There's a lot more red tape on the Chinese side since it's Tibet, and the Chinese are very particular what happens in Tibet because they're micromanaging the Tibetans, to put it bluntly. And but there are climbs on the north side yearly on the Tibetan side, north side, and not as many climbs go on the north side as they do on the south side.